Have you heard the expression, when it rains, it pours? It may mean your bad day just got worse. Today, we are going to focus on what you can do to help protect the water quality of Lake Michigan. And why? Because when it rains, it does pour. It pours pollution into our Lake Michigan watershed, and this can mean a bad day for Lake Michigan. What is the Lake Michigan watershed? And what is pollution? And how does rain pour pollution into the lake? We will explore answers to these questions together. Then discover what we can do to help protect Lake Michigan and why we should care. This is When It Rains, It Pours. Because our planet is covered mostly with water, Earth has earned the nickname the Blue Planet. Water is essential to humans, to animals, plants, to life. Water is found in many places on Earth and in many forms. Rain is one of those. Rain plays an important role in our environment and in our lives. Did you know rain helps deliver water all across our planet? Most of our planet's water can be found in the oceans in the form of salt water. In fact, 97% of Earth's water is salt water. But located right here in Northwest Indiana is Lake Michigan, one of the 5 Great Lakes. It's a source of fresh water, a vital natural resource, and our very own local natural resource. The Great Lakes contain 21% of Earth's fresh water. That's 1/5 of all the planet's fresh water. But 1/5 of Earth's fresh water isn't much. It's 1/5 of less than 1%. So what happens to rain after it lands on the Earth's surface is important when exploring ways to protect Lake Michigan. One thing we know for sure about rain, we don't want to get stuck in it. But many things that fall to the earth do get stuck and swept away in the rain and begin to travel and flow away. When a steady rain falls on vegetated areas, that's where the plants are, like fields, lawns, gardens, and forests. The rain is absorbed into the soil where it becomes groundwater. Thunderstorms that last for a long time bring heavy rains and produce more water than the ground can absorb. This causes rainwater to flow over the ground and become runoff. The runoff is particles, materials, or substances that flow into lakes, rivers, ditches, and wetlands with each rainfall or each snowmelt. And rain that falls on hard surfaces like buildings, roads, parking lots, and playgrounds also flows off of these surfaces because they also don't absorb water. So rain flowing off hard surfaces is also called runoff. It's also known as stormwater runoff because it happens during a rain event or a storm. So with each rain, there's a chance that harmful pollutants can enter Lake Michigan. The rain that becomes water flowing over the ground we now know is called runoff, and it picks up pollution as it travels. Earth's gravity forces water to flow in a downward direction. Rain falls down, but runoff flows downhill. And so the stormwater runoff will keep on flowing in search of a lower place, flowing over land, into a ditch, into a creek, even into a man-made underground pipe known as a stormwater sewer. The runoff can form puddles in low spots or cause water to puddle in the streets. If the runoff ends up in a pond or lake, it will cause that water level to rise. As the pond begins to spill over its shores, the runoff and the pollution it carries continue on their journey directed by gravity. Where we live, in Northwest Indiana, that lowest point is Lake Michigan. And our runoff flows into Lake Michigan through its web of streams and ditches and rivers, ponds and lakes. This is known as the Lake Michigan watershed. Of course, it's not actually a shed, but the area of land from which water flows to a river, a lake, or other body of water. It's a drainage network, like a natural funnel of ditches and creeks, streams and rivers, where the stormwater runoff picks up hitchhiking pollutants as it travels. Sometimes we can trace pollution back to its source or point to where it came from. We will call this type of pollution point source pollution. Remember that factory we just saw pouring toxic sludge into the river? We definitely know where that pollution came from. But what about all this litter from people and the oil and gas from our cars on the road surface that made their way into a ditch, then traveled with the rainwater, eventually ending up in Lake Michigan? For example, if all of these homes here in this neighborhood were using the same type of poison to kill weeds, when it rains, it makes it easier for these chemicals to make their way to Lake Michigan. How would we know for sure exactly where it all came from? And that oil from which car? Sometimes the source of the pollution is unknown. It's called non-point source pollution because we cannot trace it back to its source or point to where it came from. When it rains, it pours, and it pours pollution into the Lake Michigan watershed. Not only does this mean Lake Michigan's day, week, or decade just got worse, but the pollution in the runoff was causing damage all along its journey to Lake Michigan. The fertilizers that washed from gardens, lawns, and farmlands caused the plants in the ponds to grow too. This excessive growth of plants in the water upsets the balance, as the plants are now growing bigger and faster than they would naturally. Also using up the oxygen in the wetland, stealing it from other plants and animals that need it to survive. The weed killers and bug sprays that washed away are now working overtime, killing other plants and insects, not just the ones you were targeting in the garden. And these chemicals are poisoning the fish and other animals in the places where the runoff flows, creating a dangerous and toxic environment and home for the living things. When the rainwater arrived, the runoff picked up germs and bacteria from these things and traveled to Lake Michigan, which spread illness to the people and the animals. The chemicals used to clean the car and the car's oil that was carelessly dumped on the ground pollute the watershed as well. That loose soil from the construction site, the loose gravel from the boat ramp and driveway were picked up by the runoff and carried away too. But they didn't quite make it all the way to Lake Michigan. They ended up settling at the bottom of this creek on their way to Lake Michigan, blocking light for plants that these animals were planning to eat. But each time it rains, it doesn't have to mean a bad day for Lake Michigan or its watershed. Non-point source pollution, it began with us people, and now protecting Lake Michigan can begin with us, and you can start now. Pledge to become an environmental steward, an advocate standing up to the things we do to harm our environment. Your stewardship pledge is your promise to care for the earth, our environment, and to help educate others. It starts right here with Lake Michigan. As an environmental steward, you can lead your family toward making better choices and taking environmental responsibility. Here are some simple steps you can take. Number 1, never dump anything into a storm drain, ditch, or waterway. Second step, always dispose of trash in a covered container. And be sure to recycle whenever you can. Number 3, talk to your parents or the adults in your home. Encourage them to avoid using harmful fertilizers, weed killers, insecticides, and pesticides on the lawn and in the garden. Number 4, plan to plant native trees, plants, and flowers. These are the kinds of plants that belong here. They've always grown here, the types that grow best here in Northwest Indiana. They don't need extra chemicals to keep them growing or bug-free. Number 5, grow a rain garden. It works to collect runoff, and you can even use native plants to create one. Number 6, install rain barrels. They capture rainwater from your home's gutters and keep it from escaping from your yard as runoff. The captured rain can be reused to water your grass, gardens, plants, and flowers. Number 7, just remember, everybody poops. So when the dog does it, clean it up. And right away, too. And that does belong in the trash. Reuse a waterproof bag like a plastic newspaper sleeve before tossing. Remember your pledge as an environmental steward. Protecting Lake Michigan water quality starts with me.